besimcha tamid. Yavdi boy 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 boy. Mitzvah gedola liyot besimcha. Liyot besimcha tamid. Hashem besimcha, Hashem besimcha, now you don't have to be Chabad to want Mashiach.
Oh no you don't, no you don't, no you
but you gotta want Mashiach to be here. Now you don't have to be a Tzioini to love Eretz Yisrael, but you gotta love Eretz Yisrael to be here. Oh no, you don't have to be a mitzvah to learn the Torah.
Oh no you don't, no you don't, no you
But you gotta learn some Torah to be here. No, you don't have to go to Uman to have Rosh Hashanah, but you gotta have Rosh Hashanah to be in Uman.
That's a great song. It's called To Be a Yid by Joey Newcomb. You don't have to be a Litvak to learn the Torah, but you gotta learn the Torah to be a Yid. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's great to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. By the way, if you like the Yid shirt, they're available in our store at shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Nina put that link in the comments. Who's with us as we do some awesome learning on a Wednesday night, getting over the hump and headed towards Shabbos? Yehuda in South Carolina, Paul in Chicago, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, New York, Renee in Indiana, Bill in Missouri, John in Maine, Maria in Bellingham, Washington, Rebecca in LA, Pauline in Arkansas, Patrice in Utah, Gwen in Michigan, Stephen in Oklahoma, Erin saying shalom to Nina and me, David from Notre Dame in Indiana. Is it Notre Dame or Notre Dame? Let me know. Tom, a Freilika Mitvah. John in Sedona. Where am I? PK in Colorado. Leslie Ann is happy to be catching us live. Your schedule has coincided. So great to have you with us. Leslie Ann and Paul in the Great Northwest. Over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas and Seraphim in Pine Grove, California. Welcome, everybody. A quick thought. When we say the Shema, morning and evening, right? The basic statement of Jewish philosophy, Jewish religion, Jewish history, Jewish everything, the basic statement of the Torah, we say twice a day. We're commanded to say it morning and evening. We say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. I just automatically close my eyes when I say that. When we actually say it in Hebrew, and with the purpose of fulfilling our obligation, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and I wouldn't say Hashem, then when I would use God's name. At any rate, when we say that, we cover our eyes. It's not enough to close your eyes, we cover our eyes. Why? Nice, I get a daily email. I think it's a daily email, or at least a weekly email from Chabad. And that question was asked in today's email. Why do we cover our eyes? So the simple answer is to focus. You want to focus when you are fulfilling your obligation to declare God's oneness, right? God is everything. God is one, meaning that everything, this whole universe is one with God because everything is in God. I think the greatest analogy, I always use it, is just like when you're having a dream. Okay, there might be characters, people, places all happening in your dream, but it's all inside of your mental place. You're imagining that dream. You're the dreamer. If you woke up, everything in the dream would cease to be. So everything in that dream is one with you. It's part of you. It's inside of you. Likewise, this whole universe, this whole incredible cosmos, is all like a dream that God is dreaming. If God did not continue to sustain the existence of it, it would cease to be. And that's what we're declaring when we say the Shema. But if that's all we're saying, it's not enough, right? It's not enough. There's just one more aspect of that you actually have to have in mind when you say the Shema, and that is that you're accepting the yoke of heaven. Meaning, it's not just a philosophical idea. Well, God made the world, God created the world, okay, God created the world, and now I get on with my day. No. God made the world, God sustains the world, God has a relationship with you, and God wants you to acknowledge God. So when you're saying the Shema, when you're acknowledging God's role in your life, and by the way, Jews are commanded to say the Shema, but all human beings are commanded to acknowledge God. That's the first Noahide commandment, to know that I am the Lord your God. And so when you declare God's oneness, you close your eyes. You don't only close them, you cover them, because you need to focus on God's role as the creator and the master of the universe, etc. In other words, when you accept the yoke of heaven, it means you're making God sovereign in your life. You are submitting to God, right? And that's actually quite liberating, right? Because once you understand that you are a servant of God, then you have gone light years forward in understanding that you have a mission. You were sent into this world on a mission, and your job is to fulfill your mission. If you don't know what your mission is, your job is to figure out what your mission is, the unique contribution that you're going to make. All of that stems from accepting the yoke of heaven, and you do that every time you recite the Shema if you're a Jew, or when you just think about God's sovereignty in your life if you're a non-Jew. And it's an important act that you do at that moment. It's an action that you take. It's not just something you say by rote. Okay. Where are we holding? This is Daf Yudalid, page 14, here in Tractate Sukkah, the 7th volume of the Talmud. We're still in page 1. We're discussing the requirements of the Sukkah itself, which Jews are commanded to dwell within during the festival, the week-long festival of Sukkot, which we celebrate in the fall. We are discussing the 6th Mishnah, and tonight we'll also do the 7th Mishnah. We open at the bottom of page 13 on the B side. The Gemara suggests, let us say that the statement of Rav Menashe bar Gada is subject to a dispute between Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, as it was taught in a Baraisa. Fig branches, and there are figs on them. So before I continue, let's just remember what is the Mishnah that we're discussing. The 6th Mishnah is that one may not roof a sukkah. Right? The distinctive feature of the sukkah is its roofing, which allows more shade than sunlight to pass through it, but some sunlight must go through it, and it has to be made of material that grew from the ground and is no longer attached to the ground, plant matter that's no longer attached to the ground and has not been fashioned into vessels, and therefore it's not capable of becoming ritually impure, tameh. In our Mishnah, we also learn that you can't have bundles of wood, right? They may have been bundles, but they need to be untied when they're up there. If there's too much, holding them together, now it starts to feel like something that's manufactured that's up there in a way that is going to delegitimize the sukkah. So here what we're discussing is, and so what we also saw is you can't have food on the roof, right? Because food, even though it's plant-based, is susceptible to ritual impurity. Food can become ritually impure. So you don't put fruit up there. There can be fruit in the roof as long as the majority of the roofing is not fruit, right? Not vegetables, not edible plant matter. Some can be mixed in, and as we've already discussed, unless you make a stipulation otherwise, any like fruits that are included up there, which is almost like a decorative thing, it's nice, but you cannot eat it during the holiday because it's been consecrated to be part of the sukkah rather than, your meals. Okay, so now where we are now, it's saying that Rav Menashe Bar Gadia, he has a statement which is subject to a dispute between Tanaim. So as it is taught in a Baraisa, fig branches with figs on them, vines with grapes on them, straw and there are stalks of grain on them, palm branches and there are dates on them. With regard to all of these, if the amount of waste is greater than the amount of food, right? So that the branches that don't have fruit on them, if the amount of, fruitless branches is greater than the amount of food, then a sukkah roofed with them is fit. And if not, the sukkah is unfit, right? So the majority of the roofing material is edible, it will render the sukkah unfit. Acherim say, others say, but this term acherim usually refers to a statement of Rabbi Meir, as we've discussed. And the sukkah, acherim say, the sukkah is unfit until the amount of straw is greater than the combined amount of the handbreadth of the handles attached to the food that is susceptible to ritual impurity and the food. So this concept of the handles is going to come up a few times tonight. It's interesting. So you have, let's say, a cluster of grapes growing on the vine. Okay, so the vine is just the vine, right? That's not the food. The vine of the grape is not edible. The grapes are edible. The handles of the grapes are just the small branches that connect the cluster of grapes to the vine. And in some cases, those small branches are considered to be part of the fruit. And even possibly a vessel for the fruit, since it's the handle. It's like a utensil of the fruit. Even though it was just a small branch that attached that cluster of grapes to the vine. So in some cases, those small branches are considered part of the fruit. And unless the fruitless branches, the sort of waste branches, the stuff that you're just using for roofing of the sukkah, exceeds both the fruit and their handles, it won't be a fit sukkah. And the law is branches with fruit upon them. One may roof a sukkah with fruit-laden branches, provided the inedible portion is greater than the fruit on the branches. If not, one may not roof a sukkah with them. If one severs the branches for food, the handles of the fruit, i.e. the stems and the small branches attached to the fruit, are considered fruit for the purposes of this calculation. However, if one severs the branches for roofing, then the stems and branches are considered branches for the purposes of this calculation, right? So those small branches, depending on if you first severed this stuff for the purposes of food, then the handles count as part of the food. If you just severed these vines and stalks and whatever for the purpose of roofing the sukkah, then those minor branches are considered part of the roofing and not the fruit. And if one severs the branches for fruit and then reconsiders and decides to use the branches for roofing, thought alone is insufficient to alter their status. He must perform an action, for example, trampling them, in order to negate their status as food. So we're going to continue this little discussion that's right. So what was your intention when you cut the stalks? Was it to use it as roofing of the sukkah, or were you harvesting the grain, that as a farmer who's going to, treat this stuff and process it until it becomes food, wheat, flour, etc.? What was your intention when you cut the stalks? Was it for food or was it for roofing? Depending on what your intention was, that gives the identity of those small branches, either as handles of the food or as just more of the roofing. If you change your mind after you cut, you don't redesignate those small branches until you take an action. The Gemara continues. What? Is it not that they disagree with regard to this? That one sage, Acherim, who said that the straw must be greater than the handles as well, including the handles. He holds that the produce designated for roofing has handles. And the other sage, the first Tana, who disagrees, holds that they do not have handles. And the Gemara notes, according to the opinion of Rabbi Abba, who says that grape clusters harvested for the wine press do not have handles, but grain harvested for roofing does. Now, this is in keeping with the verse. This is we learned yesterday. Where do the sages get that the roofing has to have come from the ground? How do we know that from the Torah? And they looked at that verse, which connects Sukkah to the threshing floor and the wine press. The stuff that actually you thresh, the grain or the grapes, those can't be used. But the leftover, the waste matter, the stalks or the vines themselves, etc., that is what you use for the roofing. Now we're sort of going deeper into that with respect to these handles. So clearly he holds, Rabbi Abba, he holds in accordance with the opinion of Acherim, who holds that grain harvested for roofing has handles, right? Whereas the law ended up that grain harvested for roofing, well, the handles are included in the roofing, not handles for the food. However, according to the opinion of Rav Menashe Bar Gada, who says that grain harvested for roofing does not have handles, shall we say that it is a dispute between Tanaim, and that he holds in accordance with the first Tana of the Baraisa? Well, Rav Menashe could have said to you that everyone agrees with regard to one who harvests grain for roofing, the grain does not have handles. And here in the Baraisa, with what are we dealing? It is a case where one initially cut the stalks for food, and then he reconsidered his plan for them, and he decided to use them for roofing. Since initially, as food, the grain had handles, its status does not change despite his change of intent. So all that material that connects the grain to the stalks is now going to be counted as part of the grain, right? And the stalks have to outweigh the grain and its handles in order for this to be valid roofing. Those handles make a difference, right? There's enough of that material up there that if it counts as the grain rather than as the stalks, it could easily render the sukkah unfit. And the Gemara asks, well, if he initially cut them for food, so therefore the handles would be part of the food, not part of the stalks. If he cut them for food, what is the rationale for the opinion of the rabbis that the grain has no handles? As a rule, grain does have handles. And if you say that the rabbis hold that once he reconsidered his plan for them and he decided to use them for roofing, his initial intent was negated and their legal status is like any other inedible roofing and they consequently have no handles. If that's the idea, then the Gemara asks, and was his initial intent negated in that manner? Didn't we learn in a Mishna, all vessels descend into their state of ritual impurity by means of thought? Now, what's being discussed here, right, what seems to make the difference, what's dispositive, is what was his intent when he harvested the stalks? Did he intend to use them for roofing, in which case all the handles are part of the roofing, or did he intend to harvest it for food, in which case the handles are part of the food? If he harvested for food, and then he said, you know what, no, even though I cut it down for food, I'm going to use it for the roofing of my sukkah, do the handles switch their identity over to roofing rather than handles of the grain? No, because his initial intent was to harvest for food, so now the handles are part of the food. And just because he changed his mind and now he's going to use it for roofing, he didn't change the identity of those handles. And the Gemara is now going to explain why. So the example that's given is a craftsman who is manufacturing a vessel. So let's say it's a guy who's making wooden bowls. He starts with a piece of wood. There's lots of videos like this you can see of people manufacturing stuff. And so the question is, he starts with a piece of wood. At what point does it become a bowl? At what point does it become a vessel which is susceptible to ritual impurity? Right? So he could fashion, let's say, a basket out of it, or he could, carve it and make it into a bowl that would hold fruit or vegetables or liquid or whatever. It would act as a bowl. But very likely, at the time that he finishes shaping it, he's not done with his work. Probably he's going to polish it, he's going to sand it, he's going to stain it. He's going to add handles. He's going to do a lot of other stuff, even beyond when it's simply capable of holding liquid or solids in the cavity of the bowl. So at what point does it become a vessel? While he's still working on it, it's just raw materials. It's not a vessel. It cannot become tameh, ritually impure. At what point can it become ritually impure? When he says to himself, okay, it's a vessel. His thought renders it a vessel capable of becoming ritually impure. Now this matters because the roofing of a sukkah cannot be subject to ritual impurity. So that's why vessels don't count. But if it's just the raw materials that might become a vessel, but it hasn't become a vessel yet, well then it could be perhaps used as part of the roofing of the sukkah. At what point does it become a vessel? When he says to himself, okay, I'm going to use it. It's a vessel, right? You know what? I don't need to sand it. I don't need to stain it. I don't need to attach handles to it. I need a lot of bowls. Good enough, right? So at that moment, it becomes a vessel. It's susceptible to ritual impurity because he deemed it a vessel. Now he changes his mind. He says, what was I thinking? This bowl is not finished. It's so ugly. It's so rough. I want to use this during the holiday. I got to put more work into it. This is an unfinished bowl. Does his redesignation of that unfinished bowl, which a moment ago he said, it's a vessel, it's good enough, it's done. Now he says, no, it's not good enough, I need to do more work on it. Does it cease to be a vessel because he changed his mind? And the Gemara is actually going to say, no. He has to perform an action. When he takes what he thought was finished and starts working on it again, okay, then he could remove its status as a vessel, and it goes back to being raw materials until he actually finishes it and deems it a vessel. But just the fact that he changed his mind without performing some action on that bowl is not enough. So a thought can turn it into a vessel, but a second thought cannot remove its status as a vessel. It's going to take action to remove its status as a vessel. Although an unfinished vessel ordinarily cannot become ritually impure, if the craftsman decided to leave it in its unfinished state, it immediately assumes the legal status of a completed vessel and it can become ritually impure. However, they ascend from their state of ritual impurity only by means of a change resulting from action. Merely deciding to complete the unfinished vessel does not alter its status. It loses its status as a vessel only when he takes action to complete it. Action negates status created by action and status created by thought. However, simple thought, mere thought, does not negate neither action nor thought. Therefore, once the straw of the grain that was harvested for food is considered a handle and it is susceptible to ritual impurity because it's part of the food, its status cannot be negated by thought alone. It would take action to change its status. We skip a little bit. Apropos a dispute between the rabbis and Rabbi Yosef on this subject, the Gemara relates a Mishna. All handles of food that one besasan, it's a Hebrew word, besasan, on the threshing floor are ritually, it might be an Aramaic word, I'm not sure, but all handles of food that one besasan, no, it must be Hebrew because it's a Mishnah. All handles of food that one besasan on the threshing floor are ritually pure, meaning not capable of becoming ritually impure. And Rabbi Yosef deems them capable of becoming ritually impure. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of this word, besasan? So Rabbi Yochanan said, it means that one actually trampled them underfoot. And Rabbi Elazar says it means he untied their binding. And the Gemara notes, so granted, according to Rabbi Elazar, who said that besasan means that he untied their binding, like he took an action to change their status, This is the reason that Rabbi Yosei deems the handles capable of contracting ritual impurity. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said that besasan means that one actually trampled them, why does Rabbi Yosei deem the handles capable of contracting ritual impurity? Haven't they reverted to something else? Didn't one thereby render them insignificant? And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, even if the grain is trampled, the straw suits his needs, since the straw is suited to facilitate turning over the grain with a pitchfork, right? So even though he trampled the straw, it actually still serves a purpose and is therefore a kind of a utensil like the handles. And what is the purpose? He wants to turn the grain over with a pitchfork. Okay, so you can't really turn grain over with a pitchfork. You need a shovel if it's just grain. But if there's still some material attached to the grain, then you can use a pitchfork to turn it over. Why do we bother reading that? Apropos a pitchfork, the Gemara cites a related Agadic teaching, so kind of folkloric, philosophical teaching. Rabbi Elazar said, why are the prayers of the righteous likened to a pitchfork? Right? So in our culture, modern culture, the pitchfork has a very negative connotation, right? The bad guy lives down below. But no, a pitchfork is actually associated with the prayers of the righteous. Why? The prayers of the righteous are likened to a pitchfork. The word for pitchfork is eter. It is written, and Isaac entreated Va'etar, the Lord, for his wife because she was barren, right? So remember that Rebekah was barren, couldn't have children, so Isaac prayed to God on her behalf, and then she conceived Jacob and Esau, the twins. So Isaac entreated Va'etar, the Lord, for his wife because she was barren. So he prayed, right? He prayed for her. And the word that's used for that, entreated, he asked, he begged, here the English is entreated, the Lord on behalf of his wife. And it's a very similar word to the Hebrew for pitchfork, etar or eter. So just as this pitchfork overturns the grain on the threshing floor from one place to another, so too the prayers of the righteous overturn the mind of the Holy One, blessed be He. From the attribute of cruelty to the attribute of mercy, and He accepts their prayers. Right? So we should always have a personal relationship with God. We should, whenever we pray to God. This question comes up a lot when people go to the graveside of a tzaddik, right, of a righteous person, really a saint. Many people, for example, go to pray at the graveside of the Lubavitcher Rebbe at Montefiore Cemetery in Queens. In Uman, people go to pray at the graveside of Rebbe Nachman of Breslau. Are you praying to the dead person? Are you praying to the tzaddik? No, you're praying to God. We only pray to God. But we might ask the righteous person to pray on our behalf, or we want to sort of join our prayers along with all that stream of prayers which is rising at that graveside. So many people come and pray there. And there's a spiritual power that sort of resides there because there's a part of the soul of a person. We go to the world of souls when we die, when we leave this world, but a part of our soul remains with the body at its burial place. And so we're essentially asking, the tzaddik, please pray for me, or join my prayers to yours, or, strengthen my prayer to God, especially with a living person too. It's like when you go to a righteous person, you ask them to pray for you, or you ask for a blessing from them. It's like, they're righteous, right? They're so beloved of God because of their righteousness that they could put in a word for you upstairs and it can help strengthen your own prayers. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. Now we go to Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Sukkah. One may roof the sukkah with boards like those used in the ceiling of a house. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir prohibits their use. If one placed a board that is 4 handbreadths wide atop the sukkah is fit, and he fulfills his obligation, provided he does not sleep beneath the board. Okay, so generally speaking, no, we do not put boards on top of the sukkah. However, we might well use boards to hold up the roofing, right? The roofing has to rest on something, right? You need, like, especially if you have a large sukkah, what's going to hold up all those palm branches and vines and sticks and twigs and whatever you're going to use up there? It has to rest on something. So you might have beams, right, or boards to sort of hold up the roofing. But what you wouldn't do is cover the sukkah with boards. I mean, it has to let sunlight through. It has to provide more shade than sunlight. But you don't really want it to be made of manufactured boards, right? Decree with regard to boards. According to Rashi and others, a ceiling in a house usually consists of boards that are 4 handbreadths wide. And that is the reason for the decree prohibiting their use in a sukkah. But we don't restrict the use of narrower boards. Once they're narrower than the 4 handbreadths, we start to think of them as reeds, right? Now, they're manufactured, they're cut, right? They're shaped, and we'd rather have wood more or less in its raw state, but just cutting it is not, so much manufacturing. Many early authorities questioned this approach based on 2 issues. First, during Talmudic times, roofs in houses were made of narrower boards. So why would you use the kind of boards that you use for the ceiling of a house on your sukkah? You want to distinguish your sukkah from your house. And second, the language of the Gemara itself indicates that the significance of a board is determined by its size and not by its potential use in a ceiling. Consequently, they explain that the sages distinguish between roofing that looks like a regular ceiling because it is made with wide boards and roofing that is fit for roofing of a sukkah. So you can use boards, but you'd rather not. You can use narrow boards, but you'd rather not, right? You'd rather look up there and see, like bamboo slats or ideally palm leaves and palm branches, things like that. Not, lumber. You don't want the roof of your sukkah to be made of lumber. Now the Gemara. Rav said, the dispute is with regard to boards that have 4 handbreadths in their width, the standard size for boards used in house ceilings. As Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that the sages issued the decree of the roof. In other words, you can't allow the roof of your sukkah to look like the roof of a house, according to Rabbi Meir. In that case, the roofing of the sukkah with boards that wide could be confused with the ceiling of a house. And if it were permitted to roof the sukkah with a board that size, one might come to sleep beneath the ceiling of his own home during the festival and think that he was fulfilling his obligation. And Rabbi Yehuda is not of the opinion that the sages issued the decree of the roof. However, with regard to boards that are less than 4 handbreadths in their width, everyone agrees that the sukkah is fit. And Shmuel said, actually, the dispute is with regard to boards that are less than 4 handbreadths in their width. However, if they do have 4 handbreadths in their width, then everyone agrees that it is unfit. So the sage is going to argue back and forth, like exactly what width of board is going to negate the roofing of the sukkah and thus render the sukkah unfit for use in fulfilling one's obligation during Sukkah. We'll skip a little bit of that discussion, and then the Gemara cites proof with regard to the dispute between Rav and Shmuel on this subject. We learned in the Mishna, if one placed a board that is 4 handbreadths wide atop the sukkah, according to our Mishnah, so the sukkah is fit, and he fulfills his obligation, provided that when he sleeps in the sukkah, he does not sleep beneath that board. Right? There can be boards 4 handbreadths wide up there, but when you're sleeping under it, and presumably when you're eating under it, you don't want to be under that solid mass, right? You want to be able to see up through the ceiling. So granted, according to Shmuel, who said that the dispute is with regard to boards that are not even 4 handbreadths in their width. However, if they are 4 handbreadths, then everyone agrees that it is unfit roofing. So it is due to that reason that one should not sleep beneath the board. However, according to Rav, who said that the dispute is with regard to boards that are 4 handbreadths, right? That they can even be 4 handbreadths wide and it would still be fit. But if they're less than handbreadths, then everyone agrees that it is fit. Okay, so then according to Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishna, who said that you can use these boards, Rabbi Meir said you can't, but Rabbi Yehuda said yes. So then the way Rav interprets the Mishnah, then with respect to Rabbi Yehuda, why may one not sleep beneath it? If it's permissible to put it up there, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right, then why can't you sleep under it? What's the problem? And the Gemara answers, do you hold that this last halacha in the Mishnah about not sleeping beneath the board is a ruling with which everyone, including Rabbi Yehuda, agrees? No, rather, in the latter clause of the Mishnah, we have come to the opinion of Rabbi Meir. He alone, and not Rabbi Yehuda, holds that one may not sleep beneath the board. Therefore, no proof can be cited from the Mishnah. Now we're going to the B side of page 14, skipping down a little bit. I'm actually in the last 4 paragraphs, so if you have questions or comments, get them in now. Rabbi Yehuda said, there was an incident during a time of danger when the Gentiles decreed that it is prohibited for Jews to construct a sukkah, at which point we brought boards that had 4 handbreadths in their width, and we roofed the porch with them so that it would not appear to be a sukkah, and we sat beneath them. Now, this comes up from time to time, the time of danger. Right? Specifically, Rabbi Yehuda is talking about what we did. So he's talking about living in the land of Israel under the Roman occupation and really the Roman persecution. So there were times when the Romans would decree, no public display of Jewish practice, right? So it would be, if you built a sukkah in front of your house, you could get arrested and, crucified for doing that. So that people would back off, and now it's sort of like they're going into hiding. They're acting like Moranos in post-expulsion Spain. So they have to hide their Jewish practice. So instead of building a sukkah, so they're just going to take a portion of their house, the porch, and they're going to put some boards over it. Nobody would think anything of it. It's just going to look like a porch with some boards above it. And they sit underneath those boards, so that they can fulfill the obligation of dwelling in the sukkah, sleeping in it, sitting in it, eating in it. Well, did they fulfill the mitzvah, or were they just doing their best to recall that they were supposed to be doing the mitzvah, but they're being prevented because it's a time of danger? What is actually happening? So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, no, we fulfilled our obligation, and we did it with boards. And these boards, which are the standard kinds of boards used for roofing, they were 4 handbreadths wide. And nevertheless, we sat under them. They obviously weren't, there were gaps between the boards so that, some sunlight would pass through. But we sat under those boards and we fulfilled our obligation. So evidently, boards that are 4 handbreadths wide are fit for roofing a sukkah. They said to him, is there proof to be cited from there? There's no proof from actions performed during a time of danger. It is possible that the sukkah that they built on the porch was unfit, and they built it merely to commemorate the mitzvah that they were unable to fulfill. And from this baraisa, it is apparent that the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is in a case of boards that are 4 handbreadths wide, in accordance with the opinion of Rav. And with this idea of commemorating a mitzvah that we cannot fulfill, we do that all the time, right? On Yom Kippur, we will be commemorating all those commandments that we are unable to fulfill because the temple is gone. It's been gone for 2,000 years. So everything that we learned in Tractate Yoma about the practices of the high priest on Yom Kippur and the scapegoat and the other goat and the bull, etc., we can't do those. But we commemorate those mitzvahs by reading about them in the Machzor, in the prayer book that we use on Yom Kippur. So perhaps when they were sitting on their porch under some boards, it was just like emulation of what they'd like to be doing, but they're not really fulfilling their obligation. What is what they were doing? What were they really doing in that situation? It is taught in a baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. If one roofed the sukkah with cedar boards that have 4 handbreadths in their width, everyone agrees that the sukkah is not fit. Okay, so Shmuel would say if they're 4 handbreadths wide, they're unfit. Rav is saying, no, even according to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, if it's, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, if it's 4 handbreadths wide, it is fit, right? Shmuel is taking issue with that. Usually when Rav and Shmuel disagree, the law accords with Rav. That may not be the case here. So Shmuel says, if one roofed a sukkah with cedar boards that are 4 handbreadths wide, everyone agrees the sukkah is unfit. But if they're less than 4 handbreadths wide, Rabbi Meir would say they're not fit because they still look like ceiling boards, and Rabbi Yehuda would deem it fit. And Rabbi Meir concedes that if there is between one board and another board a gap, the complete width of a board, then one places fit roofing from waist of the threshing floor in the wine press, and the sukkah is fit. So you could add in those gaps proper roofing material, and then these boards aren't going to nullify the sukkah because it's like the boards are essentially holding up the proper roofing, and there's going to be more gap than board, and then the roofing comes in the proper spaces, and then this would work according to Shmuel. And Rabbi Yehuda concedes that if one roofed the sukkah with a board that is 4 handbreadths wide, but he put that 4 handbreadth wide board adjacent to one of the walls, well, then the sukkah is faced on the principle of curved wall, right? So you can have unfit roofing, like just solid board that is not fit roofing, but if it's adjacent to the wall of the sukkah, as long as it doesn't protrude more than 4 handbreadths, is it 4 handbreadths or 4 cubits? I guess 4 handbreadths adjacent to the wall of the sukkah, then even though it's horizontal, it's like even with the rest of the roof, since it's adjacent to the wall, the sages actually deem that like a curved wall. It's just like the wall curved. Even though that is unfit roofing, it's not going to negate the whole sukkah because all you really did is kind of narrow the sukkah a little bit. That part of it is unfit. You can't eat your meal or sleep there and be fulfilling your obligation, but it's not going to render the whole sukkah unfit because it's simply as if the walls curved in. You can have curved walls, and that, unfit part that's attached to the walls is just as if the wall curved in. And nevertheless, one may not sleep beneath that board, and one who sleeps beneath it does not fulfill his obligation. In any event, there are 2 baraisas, each in accordance with one of the 2 views that are presented. It is stated that there is a dispute among the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara. If one turned the unfit boards on their sides, and now the width of the side is less than the measure that renders them unfit, as it seems that all would agree, at least if it's 3 handbreadths or less, that it would be okay. It's not going to negate the roofing, have these boards up there. So all opinions agree that if it's less than 3 handbreadths, it's good. So if you have boards that are 4 handbreadths wide, they're kind of more like beams, but then you turn them on their side, and now their width is less than 3 handbreadths. So now it would seem that it's not going to be a problem, right? That's the question. If one turned the unfit boards on their sides and the width is now less than the measure that renders them unfit, do the boards remain unfit because they were unfit when they were lying on their wide side, or are they now fit because in their current placement their width is narrower than the maximum measure of boards that would be unfit? And Rav Huna said the sukkah is unfit, and Rav Hizda and Rav bar Rav Huna said it is fit. And the Gemara relates, Rav Nachman happened to come to Surah, and Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Hana entered before him, and they said to him, if one turned those boards on their sides and roofed the sukkah, what is the law? And they sought to ascertain whether his ruling is in accordance with their opinion or in accordance with the opinion of Rav Huna. And he said to them, the sukkah is unfit, like Rav Huna. And he said to them, the sukkah is unfit since the boards are unfit roofing when placed flat. Their legal status became like that of skewers, shapudin, of metal, which are unfit under all circumstances. Right? Once they were too wide, they became unfit. It doesn't matter whether you orient them on their side and make them narrower vis-a-vis the people beneath them. The fact is these boards are too wide. and they can't be used in the roofing of a sukkah. It's as if they were made of metal. Right? We've said that roofing material must grow from the ground. It must be plant matter. So anything made of metal is no good, right, for the roofing of a sukkah. And according to, Rav Nachman? According to Rav Nachman, boards that are too wide remain too wide, even if you turn them on their side where they would seem narrower. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's go to questions and comments on page 14. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol v'yivid b'ra. Sharon, the handles are inedible regardless of the intention on the use of fruit. I understand the concept of intention, but those parts are stems or chaff. They're never actually food. Is it solely because of the possibility of ritual impurity that is considered food? I mean, that's the issue, right? The issue is, are they susceptible to impurity? And if so, they're no good as roofing. Why, if they're considered part of the food, then they would be susceptible to impurity, and that's why they can't be used in the roofing. So I guess what I would say is, if you think about cherries with their little stems, right? You're not going to eat those stems, but that's part of the food, right? There's many foods that there's parts that we don't eat, right? And the fact is they come along with the food, right? So like, fruit with seeds inside of it, you're not going to pull the seeds out in order to you don't take seeds out of apples before you put apples on the table. And so the apples are considered, even with their inedible parts, the whole thing is food. And so I guess that's why when you harvest this stuff for the purpose of food, the handles, just as a rabbinic decree, are considered part of the food, and the waste matter has to amount to more than the fruit with its handles in order for the waste part to make a fit roof for the sukkah. That's how I understand it. Tom, is schach, that's the Hebrew word for roofing, with handles for food banned, or is some permitted as long as it is less than half the total of the roofing materials? Right, it's permitted. You can have it up there, but the majority of the roof has to be composed of the waste matter, the proper material for roofing, the inedible parts. And now that you included fruit in the roofing, you're not going to be able to eat that fruit until the holiday is over, unless you stipulated before you put it up there that, okay, I'm putting fruit up there in the roofing. It's less than half of the material, so it's not going to negate the roofing. I do want to eat it during the festival, so it's like I'm just storing the fruit up in the roof, but I'm planning to eat it. Unless you specifically said that, you can't eat that fruit during the festival because it's been consecrated for use in the mitzvah of Sukkah. Lucy, why is the question of ritual impurity relevant to a Sukkah at all? Sukkah is about home, not about the temple or being able to enter it. So it's a great question. Why would it matter? And really what's happening here is we're using susceptibility to ritual impurity as a way to define whether something is food or a vessel, right? The fact that it's a vessel / utensil or food, that would, they could have said the roofing has to grow from the ground and not be a utensil, a vessel, or food. But instead, they said it has to grow from the ground and not be susceptible to ritual impurity. It's just the way that they defined it. It's just a term definition. And we'll see that kind of thing comes up a lot. Even they're borrowing a definition from another area of law. Where else could susceptibility to impurity really matter during Sukkot? I mean, there were many observances of Sukkot that took place in the temple, and we'll be talking about those later in our journey through this tractate. But in terms of the Sukkah itself at home, when would Tuma apply? I don't know. I mean, there were the meticulous people who, even though they weren't priests, would not eat things unless they were sure that it was ritually pure. That's unnecessary. Only a priest is not allowed to eat things that are impure. If a person is impure, he has to go through a process before he can step into the temple. But it's a good question. I think it's just they use that definition. That's the best I can say. And finally, PK, could you give me the correct spelling of Besasan? So Besasan, right? So that's Bet Samech Samech Nun. Bet Samech Samech Nun. Okay, that is what, and I guess in English, Besasan, but it's Bet Samech Samech Nun. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 15 at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a wonderful night.